Well, the time has come for us to dig into this thing and get this engine swap out of the way. At least this ain't as bad as the Scion. Shouldn't really be too hard. Let's dig in. Alright, we're back again with the big tracker, the 2003 Chevy tracker, 4-door with a Suzuki 2.0 liter J20a Suzuki engine. Anybody that's been following knows that I've been digging into this thing on and off in many different ways when it comes to the engine. But the last big thing that we done, which was replace the oil pump, did not fix the problem. So that would just lead me to believe that internally we're nearing the end of life stages for this thing. The engine still runs, but it loses oil pressure at certain RPMs and certain loads. So rather than keep pushing this thing till it frags itself, I figure I'll pull it out now while everything is still in good working order, so when I tear it down to rebuild it, I won't have to worry about doing anything like replacing crankshafts or pistons or connecting rods. So anyway, I had already started pulling this thing apart and recorded a few clips, but unfortunately those clips were lost in the ether somewhere, so I don't have any minute details about it. But if you followed on any of the other videos, a lot of the same rules apply when it comes to doing things like disconnecting motor mounts and the crossbar that goes across the top, or even everything that is associated with pulling the transmission, such as the bell housing bolts and torque converter nuts and stuff like that. Most of those other videos would cover the intricacies when it comes to what tools and fasteners, but for the most part, you're going to be messing with a lot of 14 millimeter, 12 millimeter, and here and there you might run into some large stuff like 17 millimeter for the torque converter bolts. But this engine, being a straight engine, is not as bad to remove. All you have to worry about is just pulling all the garbage off, like the radiator hoses, had the power steering reservoir that had to come off, transmission lines, AC lines had to be disconnected, the exhaust manifold had to be disconnected from the pipe. Let's see, what else we got here? Motor mount bolts, well, not bolts, but nuts had to be removed. Whole lot of wiring that has to be unplugged, other little miscellaneous vacuum hoses, heater hoses, throttle cable. I mean, it's a lot of stuff, but it's not really that bad because it's not like you could get anything mixed up on here. It's just a matter of paying close attention when you hook everything back up so you don't forget anything. But as stated, everything's already pulled off on here, even the hood's disconnected, so we're actually ready to go ahead and bring our rebuilt engine down here and get ready to hook up to this engine here and yank this one out and start putting stuff back together. So as usual, stand by. All right, as usual, we recruit the aid of our trusty dusty neighbor tractor right here to bring the new engine, well, new rebuilt engine down. A few things we got to do to this thing before we actually install it. One is to get the bracket mount thingy off of the back of the engine so I can install the crank sensor and flywheel. Crank sensor is actually going to come off of the old engine because, well, a couple reasons. One, I don't feel like spending $75+ for another one from the local store. And secondly, that sensor there works just fine, obviously, because the engine ran. So I'm going to have to pull that engine first, get the sensor off of it, swap it into this one, torque down the flywheel bolts, and then we can go ahead and install this pile into this pile, and then take that pile there and put it on the engine stand and take that back up to the garage so it can be rebuilt at a later date. So in the meantime, we're already disconnected from our rebuilt engine. Gonna move this tractor, hook it up to that engine after I get the hood off, and then we're gonna go ahead and pull all this garbage apart. So stand by again. anyone that's familiar with these J-series Suzuki engines will know that one of the dumbest things that anybody could have ever done was mount a crankshaft position sensor on the back of the engine, where you essentially have to remove the transmission or the engine in order to access said sensor. But for those that don't remember from the last video where we pulled the transmission off to do the front seal and the sensor, those are 10mm bolts, torqued down to 4.5 foot-pounds, nothing really serious. So that's on that. Our flywheel bolts are torqued down to 51 foot-pounds. So make a reference to that. But in the meantime, I'm gonna pull this sensor out, get the one from our old engine, put it in there, get everything snugged down. There's a plate, not really a plate of sorts, but just a spacer that goes back on there before we put our flywheel on. And there's a couple of plates, one that goes on the crank, then the flywheel, and then another plate that are like washers, so to speak. So I'm gonna go ahead and get all this garbage put together so we can get ready to install our engine. All right, got everything hooked up in the rear of the engine. Verified that anything that's on this engine is also present on that engine, so we don't have to worry about swapping anything back and forth. So at that point, we're ready to go ahead and put this thing in. Let's go. Alright, we got the engine bolted up to the bell housing of the transmission, just 3 nuts and 1 long bolt. Bit of a pain in the butt to get it. One thing that'll help in making it easier is don't put the motor mount brackets on before you put the engine into the engine bay, otherwise they're just going to get in the way. I ended up taking the damn things off. But even with the transmission jack in place and all that, once the motor mount brackets were removed, it became easier to adjust the engine to slide it up against the studs on the transmission. So with that all said and done, I could put those brackets back on and get the engine fully seated onto the mounts, so then we can go ahead and move on with the reassembly of everything. So let's continue. All right, made a little bit of progress. Got our engine fully in place. Motor mount brackets are down. The crane, well, not the crane, the tractor is moved away and is staged to pick that engine up and put it on the stand. It even took a little bit of time to plug up a lot of the wiring as I saw it, and some heater hoses back here had to take care of. And I will say, those heater hoses are a pain in the butt. If you get the chance, you would probably do well to remove the heater hoses from the firewall or from your other engine, plug them up to your new engine, and then put your engine in. This way all you have to do is plug the hoses up to the firewall. Because if you have to go in back there to try to release those spring clamps and everything, you're going to cut the hell out of your hands and do all kinds of crap and probably despise the engine and the car in general. But I got it all in, so the heater hoses are in place. A lot of the plugs back there are also secured and everything. A few little odds and ends that still have to be done. Got our fuel hoses down there, some ground straps, a couple other little hoses. Our air cleaner assembly has to go in. Also got to put some spark plugs and put the coil packs in there and secure all that garbage. Then, of course, the radiator hoses and AC lines, all that stuff. So, going to continue on with the work. Stand by. All right. We have most of the stuff hooked back up on here. Exhaust manifold, power steering pump, AC lines, air cleaner assembly, even the cross bar right here. All the stuff is hooked back up, and it's not still ready to go quite yet because there's a couple things we got to do. Had to order a new harmonic balancer because, well, the old one is garbage, and we're not going to put garbage on here, so in the meantime I have to wait for that. Once I get the balancer on there, then I can get the serpentine belt on. Then I could get the fan assembly, which is a pulley in and of itself with an extra belt. And then I could put the fan shroud and radiator back in and hook all that up and put all the fluids in this thing, and the battery, so we can be able to start this thing up. So in the meantime, we're gonna have a little bit of a standby because I gotta wait for a part. So stand by. All right, we got our fresh crank pulley in place. The bolt is torqued down to 108.5 foot-pounds. I don't know why they would go with 0.5, but that's what it said, and that's what I did. Now you might wonder, how the heck did I keep the engine stationary in order to be able to apply such a large amount of torque? Well, give me a minute. I basically took a screwdriver, large screwdriver, and wedged it in between the torque converter and flywheel and just cranked the engine over until the thing wedged itself so the engine won't turn anymore. Of course, you got to be careful so you don't damage your flywheel in any way, so you just kind of stick the screwdriver in there and just maybe give it a little bit of a tap with a hammer to make sure it's secured. But our bolt's secured on the crank pulley. Now we can put together the rest of the stuff. We still have our fan assembly and radiator to put in. All right, we have our fan bracket secured. The belt's in place, tensioned and all. We also have our serpentine belt on everything else. Those bolts down there, they have to be torqued to 33 foot-pounds, which isn't a whole lot, but a lot of this stuff is aluminum, so you can't torque it down too much unless you want to booger the treads up. But that's all in. Next, and really pretty much the last thing, is getting the radiator and fan shroud in. Then we can throw some fluids in here and see if this pile will actually run. Stand by. All right, in the beginning we couldn't get any kind of spark to this thing, and there's a good reason for that. That little component right there, camshaft position sensor. Not the synchronizer part, but the sensor itself, the little proc switch or Hall effect sensor. I don't know if it's a Hall effect sensor or not, but whatever. The one that was on this engine, bad. Borrowed the one from the old engine and put it in here, and we're gonna go ahead and start this piece of shit up. Give me a second. Starts up. So far we got oil pressure from what I could see. Just waiting to see if that clickety clacky sound from the valve train shuts up. Hopefully it starts getting enough oil circulating to quiet it down. The other thing too, while playing around with the initial problem, had to play around and adjust the synchronizer on the camshaft to try to, well, adjust the idle, and hence the timing a little too advanced. Burn off all that oil on the doggone exhaust. But the engine runs so far. Let this thing try to warm up a little bit. Stand by a minute while I start poking my head around everything. Alright, so far the engine seems to be kind of cooperating, but there's little things that we need to make note of. There's a lot of stuff on this engine, being a junkyard engine. There's a lot of crap on here that, well, it's bad. Alternator's bad. Might be a possibility the water pump is bad. Even the throttle position sensor is more than likely bad, because I don't really get a good throttle response. That's the type of reaction I get when I try to cycle the throttle. It does that. no smooth throttle response, so it's probably not getting any kind of feedback from the damn thing. And the idle's kind of high, but I can't really set the idle until I address all that other crap, because if the alternator ain't doing what it's supposed to do, I get erratic voltage. If the TPS ain't doing what it's supposed to do, well, it don't know what the hell it's doing. So all in all, the engine is running, so we're gonna have to address all that other crap though. So again, this is gonna be another standby, a good long one, because I gotta remove a bunch of crap from the old engine, including the oil dipstick, because it is getting oil at the top now, because it's puking it out of the hole for the dipstick. So at least we know we're getting oil on the top end, and I'm sure the longer this piece of shit runs, the more circulation of oil through all the internals will hopefully quiet things down some. But because this is the break-in phase, I put some cheap oil in there to at least run this thing and let it get nice and broken in. And after that, I don't know, I have to see what kind of break-in period we have for this engine before I change the oil and everything. But anyway, talking too much. Let me get this other crap changed out after this thing cools down. Stand by. Alright, after playing around with this thing and getting it to where it needs to be, with the use of the scanner, of course, to make sure the timing was in an acceptable zone and all that good stuff. As you've seen, we got some test driving in, got it up to around 50, give or take, based on the area we're in, and the fact that this is still a kind of a fresh engine, so it can't beat the crap out of it. But yeah, engine runs pretty good, good response, throttle response and everything, smooth. I think everything is ready to rock and roll. But yeah, our engine's ready to go. This little baby SUV is ready to go with a refreshed engine. Obviously we didn't do all the stuff you'd normally do on a rebuild, but I mean, a lot better than where it was. So yep, like, subscribe, notifications, TikTok, all that good stuff, and we'll catch you later. It's getting a little warm out here. I'm out.